Hey guys, tonight we're drifting not just into history, but into water. Sort of. Imagine a garden that floats. Now, imagine it doesn't sink. Now, imagine it feeds an empire. Tonight, we're going to a place where corn grew on water, tomatoes thrived on woven reeds, and farming involved canoes more than hoes. This is the story of the Aztec Chinampas, the so-called floating gardens of Lake Texcoco. And no, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes farming on one. Too much mud, too many frogs, and 0 places to plug in your phone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of Lake Texcoco. The water is still, the kind of still that makes sound echo across it like a whisper inside a cathedral. Fog drapes the shoreline like a half-forgotten dream. The sky above is the softest shade of gray-blue, with hints of pink starting to peek in. It's just before sunrise. The air is cool, but not cold. It smells of lake water and morning soil with a hint of roasted maize drifting from somewhere unseen. Your feet rest on packed earth, and then, as you take a few more cautious steps, onto something softer, springy, alive. It's not land, exactly, and it's definitely not just water. It's something in between. And ahead of you, stretched in neat, quiet rows like puzzle pieces floating just shy of touching, are gardens. Floating gardens. They look like islands built by someone who wasn't quite ready to commit to the whole, solid ground thing. Gardens with edges that ripple. Gardens with ducks swimming around their roots. Gardens with crops, maize, chilies, beans, growing as confidently as if they didn't know they were suspended in mud, reeds, and miracle. You hear a soft sound behind you, the splash of a wooden paddle. A canoe glides by, its oarsman standing in perfect balance, a woven hat shielding his face from a sun that hasn't even risen yet. He nods. You nod back. Apparently, nodding is the universal way to say, yes, I too am amazed by these floating vegetables. And then it begins. The sun crests the horizon like a slow applause. Light spills across the water, and the gardens sparkle. Not glittery sparkle, but the kind that makes you wonder if maybe the earth here hums a little louder than usual. A small boy leaps from one chinampa to another. He doesn't even pause. It's like walking across lily pads, if the lily pads were stable enough to hold cornfields. A heron flaps lazily overhead. You can't help but crouch down. Place your hand on the soft earth beneath your feet. It's warm, damp, and alive. And it doesn't sink, not even a little. That's when you realize you're not standing on land. You're standing on centuries of human ingenuity, layers of reeds, mud, roots, and hope, stitched together with the patience of people who understood. Something we keep forgetting, that food grows better when you listen to water. And right now, the water is whispering, and it's saying, stay. You step carefully between rows of something green and leafy. Maybe amaranth, maybe lettuce, maybe something that just looks like lettuce but bites back if you insult it. Either way, you're moving slowly because this place deserves slowness. Gentle breeze ripples through the reeds. The water laps at the edges of the Chinampa like a cat testing a cushion. And you start to wonder, why here? Why build all of this on water? Why not move inland, up a hill, into the forests, onto land that doesn't squish slightly when you shift your weight? And then you realize that's exactly what the Aztecs asked themselves, but in reverse. See, the story goes that long before these gardens floated, the Mexica people, who later became the Aztecs, were wandering, migrating, looking for a sign, not a real estate agent, a prophecy. They were told they'd find their home where an eagle landed on a cactus, devouring a snake. The kind of oddly specific imagery that would make even modern GPS blush. And where did they find that? On a soggy, island-dotted lake bed. Not ideal, you might think. But to them, perfect. Because that's the thing. To the Aztecs, water wasn't a barrier. It was a resource. It fed the gods. It fed the crops. It fed the people. And it fed the imagination. Building a city in the middle of a lake wasn't madness. It was brilliance with a little extra splash. The kind of decision you make when you believe that anything can grow if you're stubborn enough and you have enough mud. So they did it. They drove wooden stakes into the shallows, wove reed rafts, piled silt and sediment from the lake bottom, layer after layer, earth, weed, muck, mulch, a sandwich of survival. They anchored the rafts with willow trees whose roots grew down into the lake and held tight like nature's fingers. And voila, Chinampas, a place to plant, a place to build, a place to dream. From above, the city of Tenochtitlán would one day look like a mosaic, shimmering blue and green tiles crisscrossed by canals, like someone tried to turn Venice into a spreadsheet. And at the heart of it, these gardens, not just floating, rooted, but also rising. You walk further, stepping over a small irrigation ditch, just wide enough for a canoe, just narrow enough that you nearly trip and fall face first into a zucchini patch. Smooth. From somewhere, nearby, you hear the croak of frogs, the distant splash of a paddle, and the whistle of a bird that sounds suspiciously like it's laughing at you. You look back at the garden path behind you, still intact, still buoyant, and you realize something. This wasn't built in spite of the water. It was built with it. The Aztecs didn't fight the lake. They folded it into their lives. They didn't fear the mud. They grew food in it. And you're starting to feel it too. That gentle sway, the rhythm of a world that refuses to choose between solid and liquid. Because here, on this not-quite island, not quite raft, not quite land, you're floating. And yet, you've never felt more grounded. You crouch beside a patch of freshly turned soil, though soil might be a generous word. It's more like lake bottom stew, black, rich, spongy, and slightly smelly in the way that all life-giving things are. A man nearby kneels with purpose. His hands are calloused, but move gently, like he's petting the earth. He holds a bundle of reeds in one hand and a muddy armful of lake silt in the other. Then, no ceremony, no announcement, he starts building a garden. It's the most casual miracle you've ever seen. One reed is laid down, then another, like weaving a raft that intends to grow spinach. Once the base is thick enough, he slaps on layers of wet, heavy soil dredged from the lake, like frosting a cake that might sprout corn. You blink, then blink again. This is the birth of a Chinampa. and it looks deceptively easy. You lean closer. The layers are precise. Reed, mud, straw, compost, more mud, and finally, a dusting of dry lake sand to keep things from getting too clingy. And then, the master stroke, he plants a young willow sapling at the corner. It's barely a stick, but someday, its roots will anchor this entire garden to the lake bed. A living nail, a green spine. You watch in silence as another Chinampa begins beside it. Then, another. They're staggered like dominoes across the shallows, leaving canals between them just wide enough for a canoe to pass. It's not farmland. It's aquatic architecture. It doesn't roar. It doesn't rise in steel and stone. It floats quietly into being. And maybe that's what makes it so impressive. The Chinampa is not a spectacle. It's a system, a conversation between humans and water, between roots and reeds, between patience and produce. You reach down and press your fingers into the top layer. It's springy, soft, but with a kind of hidden strength. You could probably sleep here, or grow carrots, or both, and you start to understand. This is farming that listens. It listens to tides, to rainfall, to sediment and season. There are no machines, no motors, no shouting into the soil, just mud and genius. A dragonfly buzzes past your ear. It pauses, hovers, then flits toward a small blossom sprouting from a cracked squash vine. In the distance, a paddle hits water in a rhythmic beat. A woman rows past, her boat loaded with saplings, compost, and something wrapped in banana leaves that smells faintly of chocolate. You wonder if she's delivering breakfast or a shrine offering? Honestly, it could be both. Because here, where gardens are born on water and rooted with trees, everything feels possible, even floating, even stillness, even food that begins with silence. You sit cross-legged on the edge of a Chinampa, trying not to think about how many feet of mud separate you from the lake bed below. The surface beneath you doesn't rock, it doesn't wobble, it just holds. And that's confusing because, by all logic, this garden, this floating plot of beans and flowers and squash vines, should not exist. It should have sunk ages ago, or drifted away, or at the very least, sagged into mush. But it hasn't. So let's pause here, right here, in the middle of this not-quite island, and ask the obvious question, what even is a Chinampa? You glance around. To your left, a farmer in a russet tunic is gently prodding tomato plants into straight rows. To your right, a small dog sniffs at a pile of sweet potatoes, as though hoping one might roll away and become a snack. And beneath you, a marvel of ancient engineering. You dig your fingers into the topsoil. It's warm and dense, with layers that feel deliberate, because they are. A Chinampa isn't just a garden. It's a raft of fertility. Start with lake reeds, broad, flexible, woven tightly into mats. Then comes the lake muck, dark, rich, and full of nutrients, the way soup is full of memories. That muck gets layered and layered, alternating with compost, leaves, and anything else that might convince a seed to sprout. But here's the twist. It doesn't float forever. Chinampas are eventually anchored. Trees, mostly willows, are planted at the corners, their roots growing deep into the lake bed. Over time, silt builds up, the raft solidifies, and the whole thing transitions from floating garden to soggy but reliable platform of bounty. Think of it as hydroponics meets stubborn optimism, powered entirely by mud and patience. You pluck a tiny green sprout from the soil and turn it in your fingers. It smells fresh, like morning and ambition. And the crops, they're not just symbolic. The Aztecs grew everything here. Maize, beans, squash, amaranth, chilies, even flowers for rituals. Marigolds so golden they looked like portable sunrises. And since the gardens were surrounded by canals, irrigation wasn't just efficient. It was constant. Water soaked in from all sides. No need for hoses or prayers, just proximity. A dragonfly lands on your knee. You stare at it, and it stares back. Or at least, you assume it does. It's hard to read a bug's expression. And maybe that's the other secret of the Chinampa. It wasn't just a structure, it was a habitat. Not only for people, but for birds, frogs, fish, and bugs. Even the bacteria here seemed better behaved. Part of a system that cleaned the water while feeding the roots. A self-sustaining miracle. No batteries required, no industrial revolution necessary. Just people, mud, and enough time to weave a future. You lie back in the grass and close your eyes. The ground beneath you doesn't creak or groan. It just holds. And in that stillness, you realize this garden doesn't just grow vegetables. It grows trust. You wiggle your toes against the warm, damp earth and think, this really shouldn't work. You've walked on wooden docks before. They groan, they tilt, they betray your balance just when you get confident. You've stood in muddy fields. They suck at your boots like jealous ghosts. But this is neither dock nor swamp. This is a Chinampa, and somehow it floats without actually floating. A trick worthy of a magician if the magician specialized in botany, soil science, and patient optimism. You kneel down and scoop up a handful of topsoil. It's dense, layered, and slightly spongy. You don't need a lab coat to know. This stuff is alive. But you're still baffled. How does it not sink? It turns out the Aztecs weren't just gardeners. They were subtle engineers. The secret? Buoyancy meets anchoring. In the early days, Chinampas did float. Woven reed mats piled with silt would drift gently across the lake like lazy rafts of salad. Farmers steered them with poles, letting them soak up nutrients and sunlight before anchoring them into place. But then came phase 2. They jammed willow trees into the corners, not just for aesthetics, though the leafy vibes were nice, but because those roots reached down like anchors, winding through muck, gripping the lake bed with the quiet strength of something that has no interest in being moved. Over time, the floating mats became embedded, not floating, not sinking, just suspended, like an idea that refuses to leave your mind. You press your palms into the soil again. No give, no sag. Solid enough to build on, plant on, maybe even nap on, if you trust the ducks to keep. Watch, and there's more. The canals surrounding each Chinampa weren't just for boats. They served as natural moats, keeping weeds in check and moisture flowing. Every few days, farmers would scoop nutrient-rich mud from the canal bottoms and slap it back on top of the gardens like homemade fertilizer lasagna. The result? Land that renewed itself. No tractors, no chemicals, no crop rotation, just water, roots, and ritual. You stand and glance across the vast green patchwork of Chinampas spreading into the mist. They look like stepping stones designed for giants, or a game board for deities with a fondness for agriculture. Spot a farmer down the way, gently coaxing a line of bean plants up a hand-twisted lattice of reeds. His canoe floats nearby, half filled with compost and humming with flies, who clearly appreciate the menu. You wave, he waves back. And somehow, in that simple exchange, you feel like you're part of something ancient. Something rooted, not just in earth, but in understanding. Because here's the thing. The Chinampa isn't just clever. It's collaborative. It's humans and nature negotiating. You give water a garden. Water gives you dinner. And you both agree not to sink the deal. You sit again, the earth warm beneath you, the air smelling of basil and wet clay, and you smile, thinking, this garden doesn't float, it belongs. The sun's a little higher now, catching on the water like it's been dusted with gold leaf. You follow the sound of gentle sloshing and the faint creak of wood on water. A canoe appears from between two Chinampas, gliding like it's in no hurry. And why would it be? Inside is a farmer. His arms move with the rhythm of someone who's done this since before he could spell the word paddle. In the boat, baskets. Neat, tight woven, and overflowing with produce. Tomatoes, red enough to make your eyes widen. Chilies so green, they seem photoshopped. A pile of squash, glistening like they just got out of a vegetable spa. The boat pulls up beside a small earthen landing. You follow him quietly. Absolutely bartering way too aggressively for an armful of avocados. And every bit of food you see, it came from the water, not the fish. Though yes, there's a stall for those too, featuring something with way too many teeth and not enough charm. No, this is produce, and all of it came from Chinampas, from mud to market. You step past a stand selling dried chilies, their scent sharp and smoky, past another where a woman is arranging cempasúchil blossoms in symmetrical bundles, the kind that end up at temples or tucked behind ears. You pick up a strange fruit, small, orange, soft-skinned. You don't know what it is, but the vendor smiles and presses a second one into your hand. A gift or a challenge. You bite. It's tangy, sweet, unreasonably juicy, like someone distilled a thunderstorm into a snack. You look around, the place is alive with rhythm, not hustle exactly, but flow, people moving with purpose, but without the panic that usually follows farmers' markets in modern cities. And through it all, boats arrive and depart, loaded with more food, more herbs, more color. From floating gardens, straight to floating economy. The Aztecs built an entire agricultural logistics system on mud and ingenuity. And you know what? It works. No trucks, no warehouses, just water, baskets, and really well-balanced paddles. You watch a young boy climb into a canoe with 2 baskets, one in each hand. His father gently pushes him off, and he rows away, smiling like this is the best part of his day. And maybe it is. You take a seat on a flat stone, sipping from a clay cup someone handed you without explanation. It tastes like cacao and rain and something floral you can't identify, and it hits you. This market isn't an afterthought. It's part of the system. Food doesn't just appear here. It arrives, gracefully, reliably, from gardens that shouldn't exist, and yet absolutely do. You follow a narrow canal now, ducking beneath the low-hanging branches of a willow whose roots dip into the water like they're tasting it. The path bends and weaves, bordered on one side by tall maize and on the other by rippling, clear water that reflects the sky with smug accuracy. And as you walk, something becomes obvious. This isn't just a bunch of floating gardens. This is infrastructure, and the people who built it? Engineers, specifically Aztec water engineers. And yes, that's a title they absolutely earned without a single degree or blueprint printer. Because while the Chinampas look soft and dreamy, like someone daydreamed a salad bar into existence, the systems underneath are anything but improvised. You pause at a fork in the canal. To your left, the water moves quickly, clean, direct, flowing like it has somewhere to be. To your right, it slows, curling lazily around Chinampas stacked with squash blossoms and climbing beans. It's subtle, but intentional. Because the Aztecs didn't just build gardens, they built a hydraulic ballet, aqueducts, retention ponds, floodgates, spillways. Some were tiny, barely noticeable except to the water. Others were monumental, like the Albarrádon de Nezahualcóyotl, a dike system that kept brackish water out of the freshwater zones with the precision of a coffee snob choosing beans. You walk alongside a group of workers laying new reed bundles beside a canal bank. One of them gestures toward the water and says something softly, a word that sounds like Tlalticpac. You don't speak Nahuatl, but you get the gist. This land isn't land until you convince the water to agree, and that takes diplomacy and engineering. And sometimes a little bribery in the form of flowers tossed into the current. You kneel beside the canal and dip your hand into the water. It's cool and silken. Beneath the surface, you see a lattice of roots and pebbles, not random, deliberate, like a net meant to hold not fish, but function. Up ahead, a small sluice gate opens, and a trickle of water slides into a narrow side canal, flooding the edge of a thirsty Chinampa. Someone timed that. Someone built that. Someone who understood the balance between too dry and too drowned. You hear laughter behind you. 2 young farmers balancing buckets of silt between them as they wade through. Knee-deep canal water. They're singing something. The tune is old, maybe older than the lake itself, and you think, this isn't farming, this is choreography. Every root, every reed, every canal twist and water diversion, all of it designed with care, not just to survive, but to thrive, and more importantly, to last. Because while cities fall and empires crumble, water always remembers. And here, among the floating gardens of Tenochtitlán, water remembers being useful. You sit beneath the willow, eyes closed for a moment, listening to the sound of water moving where it's supposed to. Not crashing, not flooding, just cooperating. And you wonder, when did we forget to build like this? You hear a bell, Not the kind made of brass or meant to call people to prayer, but a soft chime, wooden, hollow, struck gently by hand. It echoes across the canal like a question waiting for an answer. You round the bend, and there it is, a school. Floating, or rather, built on a chinampa wide and solid enough to hold a few dozen children, a reed-roofed shelter, and a small shrine tucked neatly in one corner, like a respectful afterthought. This isn't the kind of school with desks and uniforms. It's more immersive. Literally. The teacher, an elder in a faded blue robe, stands barefoot on packed soil, a stalk of maize in one hand and a clay tablet in the other. The students, some cross-legged, some sprawled like sleepy cats, sit beneath a canopy of vines. They're learning about the gods, not from books, from the plants, from the water, from the soil that listens better than most students. You crouch near the edge, unnoticed, observing as the lesson continues. The teacher taps the stalk of maize and begins a chant. Low, rhythmic, almost a lullaby. The children repeat it, and the wind seems to carry their voices into the lake like offerings. Then, the lesson shifts. Now they're counting seeds, organizing them in piles, grouping by size, color, texture. It's math, but disguised as gardening. Or maybe it's gardening disguised as math. Either way, it's effective, and it doesn't stop there. Next, a girl rises and walks quietly toward the shrine in the corner. A simple stone figure wrapped in marigold strands. She kneels, offers a flower and a whisper, then returns to class. No one claps, no one grades it. But somehow, it feels like the most important part of the day. Because in this world, education and ritual are not separate. You don't just learn how to grow food. You learn why it grows. You don't just study gods. You plant offerings beside their likeness and watch them bloom into real petals. The sun peeks through the roof thatch, dappling the ground in golden circles. A boy lazily scratches a figure into the dirt with a stick. It looks like a duck, or maybe a god, or maybe a duck-god hybrid that's yet to be peer-reviewed. The teacher doesn't correct him. He nods once and keeps talking. You smile. There's a calm here. The kind that comes when learning feels more like remembering. The breeze carries. The smell of damp clay, crushed flowers, and ink. Someone's writing something nearby, probably a prayer disguised as a poem. A canoe arrives at the far end of the Chinampa. A woman steps off with a basket of tamales and a soft grin. Lunchtime. No cafeteria, just a patch of shade, a warm stone to sit on, and the hush of water against roots. You're tempted to stay, just long enough to learn the difference between a squash vine and a snake that's pretending to be a squash vine. But for now, you watch as the children gather in a circle, sharing food, laughter, and lessons with no blackboards, no walls, and no separation between the sacred and the growing. Because here, a garden can be a classroom, a reed hut can be a shrine, and a floating chinampa can hold more wisdom than an entire library if you're quiet enough to listen. The sun is high now, warming your shoulders, glinting off the water like scattered coins. You walk slowly, deeper into the Chinampa fields, and before long you find yourself in a maze of stalks, tall, rustling, golden-tipped. Corn. It towers over you, whispering in the wind, moving in gentle sync, like it knows a song you've forgotten. Corn was everything to the Aztecs. Food, fuel, symbol, story. It didn't just feed the people. It shaped their calendar, their ceremonies, their gods. They had a maze deity, Tenochtitlán, and no one was allowed to joke about his eyebrows. Probably, and here's the strangest part. This corn grew on water. You reach out and touch a leaf. It's coarse, fibrous, sun-warmed, the kind of texture that feels ancient even when it's new. Below your feet, the Chinampa breathes, not literally, of course, but it's hard not to imagine it exhaling as you walk across it, offering up stalk after stalk of golden grain like a gift. This floating farm is a kind of miracle, yes, but it's also math. A maize plant requires water, sun, nutrients, and space. The Aztecs figured out how to provide all of that, constantly, in a system that used no pipes, no plastic, and no irrigation schedules. The canals watered from below. The sky lit from above. The mud replenished itself. It was the world's gentlest pressure cooker. You reach a clearing where a group is gathered. Women with baskets, children chasing each other with corn husks, an elder roasting ears of corn over a flat stone slab. Smoke curls lazily into the air, smelling like comfort and almost burning. Someone offers you a roasted cob. You accept. It's hot, slightly charred, and perfect. Sweet, earthy, and just a little bit smoky. You take a bite. It tastes like sunshine trapped in starch, like time slowed down and turned into a snack. Nearby, a man is playing a reed flute while a dog sleeps beside him, tail twitching in dreams of leftover tortillas. A child strings together corn kernels like beads, turning lunch into jewelry. And, in the middle of all this peace, a ceremony is quietly unfolding. A woman in a saffron robe stands beside a small altar made of stone and shells. She lifts a bowl of ground maize and scatters it into the canal, her hands slow and deliberate. A blessing, a thank you, a promise to keep growing. You sit down beside a row of stalks and feel the ground hum beneath you. Not actually, of course, but in that way, old places do when they're still proud of their purpose. Corn didn't just grow on water here, it belonged on water. The roots reached downward through layers of mud and woven reeds. The stalks reached upward through steam and smoke. And in between, sustenance, not just calories, but culture, identity, continuity. A bird calls overhead. A kernel pops in the fire with a satisfying crack. And someone tells a joke in Nahuatl that you don't understand, but laughter needs no translation. You lean back in the soft grass at the Chinampas' edge, corn cob still in hand, sun warm on your face. And you think, some miracles wear feathers, some ride clouds, and some come wrapped in husk and ash, sweet enough to make you forget the world for a while. You hear a snort, not human, not threatening, just deeply barnyard. You turn, and there it is. A small, shaggy pig trotting confidently down the edge of a Chinampa like it owns the place. Which, to be fair, it might, because here's something you didn't expect. These floating gardens weren't just for plants. They were for animals too, and not just the usual suspects. This isn't some modern petting zoo where goats wear bow ties and everyone's Instagramming the llamas. No, this is an ecosystem, and everything here has a role. You step aside as the pig ambles past you, snuffling happily. A second later, you hear splashing. Ducks. A whole row of them, floating between Chinampas, quacking at nothing in particular, or perhaps arguing about territory. They're plump, glossy, slightly judgmental, and extremely productive. The ducks are welcome here not just for their eggs and meat, but because they help keep pests in check. They munch on bugs, nibble on weeds, and stir up nutrients as they paddle. It's like hiring a janitor who also lays breakfast. You keep walking. Near one garden's edge, you spot a wooden enclosure, low and tidy. Inside, dogs. Not just any dogs. Xoloitzes quintli, the famous hairless breed of the Aztecs. Sleek, ancient, soulful-eyed. They lounge in the sun like royalty, occasionally lifting their heads to sniff the air or blink slowly in disapproval. And then, you freeze. In the shadow of a Chinampa wall, something stirs. It looks like a salamander. No, it's not a salamander. It's pinkish, smiling, wiggling, an axolotl. Yes, really, one of the most peculiar, precious creatures of this entire floating world. A kind of aquatic dragon child who never quite grew up. It lives in the canals, tucked beneath lily pads and duckweed, peering out like a myth that accidentally became real. The Aztecs loved axolotls, not just because they're adorable, though, let's be honest, they're basically wet kittens, with frilly gills, but because they symbolized rebirth, healing, transformation that didn't require destruction. You crouch beside the canal, and one floats to the surface. It stares at you with the kind of blank serenity that only a creature without eyelids can pull off. You stare back, it blinks, or doesn't. Hard to say. Still, you feel seen. You hear a rustling behind you and turn just in time to see a child, carrying a bundle of herbs balanced on a chicken's back. No one questions it. The chicken seems fine with the arrangement, possibly flattered. And that's when it clicks. This isn't a garden with animals. This is a garden of animals. Everything moves together. The pigs aerate the soil. The ducks fertilize the water. The axolotls supervise. And the people? They don't control this world. They cohabitate with it. Even the mosquitoes are probably on some kind of celestial committee. You lie down in the grass at the edge of the canal, watching a turtle sun itself on a flat rock. A dragonfly dances above, the surface like a drunk acrobat. Somewhere nearby, a frog begins a solo that no one asked for, but everyone accepts. You exhale. The animals exhale back. And you realize, in this floating world, life doesn't dominate. It drifts. Together. The sky is shifting. That soft, uncertain blue has deepened into indigo, then navy, then something inky and endless. The sun has slipped away without fuss, leaving behind a sky pinpricked with stars, and a silence that feels padded, like the world wrapped itself in a wool blanket. You're still here, still on the Chinampa, but now it's nighttime, and everything feels different. Not frightening, just slower, quieter, thicker. The garden hasn't gone to sleep exactly. It's just changed gears. You lie flat on your back, the warm earth beneath you still holding the day's heat. The scent of damp soil and crushed marigold floats in the air, mingling with the faint smell of smoke from a nearby fire. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays, a slow, breathy tune that rises and falls like reeds swaying in the canal. And then you hear it. Drip, ripple. Croak. The night chorus has begun. Frogs, ducks, the occasional snort from a half-asleep pig, all joining in with the calm confidence of beings who know they don't need an audience. You sit up slowly, blanket wrapped around your shoulders, and look around. The Chinampa glows, not with light, but with presence. Fireflies wink in and out of existence. The trees are darker now, more silhouette than structure. The canals shimmer faintly, mirroring constellations that never learned how to spell quiet. And the people? They've gathered around small cooking fires on neighboring Chinampas, their laughter low and round. One family sits in a canoe, drifting slowly past, the mother handing out tamales from a clay pot, while the father rows lazily with one hand. You wave. The child on the bow waves back, cheeks full of food and joy. You spot an old man fishing with nothing but thread and a carved stick. His line trails into the canal, unmoving. You can't tell if he's waiting for a bite or simply enjoying the excuse to sit still. Either way, you respect it. Nearby, a few figures have bedded down on straw, mats, no tents, no cabins, just trust in the Chinampa, in the sky, in the fact that the world will hold them through the night. You lie back again, eyes open, watching clouds drift lazily across the stars like forgotten thoughts. There's a kind of magic in this moment, not the loud kind with sparks and transformation, but the kind where nothing happens and it's perfect. Because sometimes the greatest rebellion isn't action, it's stillness. A Chinampa at night isn't just a garden, it's a floating bedroom, a meditation, a pause between the pages of a history book. And here, lying on a mat of earth and water, your head resting on your arm and the sky pressing gently into your thoughts, you understand what the Aztecs must have known. That peace isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of balance. You close your eyes. The flute continues. And the Chinampa, somehow floating, rocks you into sleep. The dream is soft, something about maize that sings and axolotls that tell jokes with their eyebrows. But it slips away as a sudden sound interrupts the stillness. Splash, then another, then silence. You sit up slowly, blanket slipping from your shoulders, heart not quite racing but definitely stretching its legs. It's still dark, though the moon is brighter now, silvering the water, making the Chinampas glow like quiet boats without sails. But something's changed. The air feels tighter. There's movement across the canal. Figures. Not many, just 2 or 3, creeping along a neighboring garden. Shadows cutting across, moonlit rows of squash and amaranth. They're not farmers. They're not from here. And they're being very careful not to be seen. Your host, a woman who's lived her whole life on this floating patch of brilliance, is already awake. She doesn't panic. She doesn't shout. She just gestures, one finger. Down. You flatten into the soil, the warmth of the earth still beneath you, but now it feels different. Less like comfort, more like cover. From the shadows, you watch. This is trouble from the mainland. The kind of trouble that comes when land-hungry outsiders look at the floating gardens and think, why not ours? The Aztecs dealt with this for centuries. Raiders, thieves, opportunists, not armies, not yet. Just the occasional night visitor who wanted to borrow a canoe, or a harvest, or sometimes an entire Chinampa. They always came quietly. They always thought no one was watching. But the lake watches. The animals stir. A frog croaks loudly, maybe in protest, maybe just confused. A duck flutters its wings, annoyed by the intrusion. Somewhere, a pig grumbles. And then, sploosh, the sound of a boat tipping. One of the invaders, or unauthorized harvesters, if we're being polite, has stepped wrong. You can't see the splash, but you hear the curse, half muffled by water and embarrassment. Someone else whispers urgently. Then another splash. More frantic this time. They're leaving. Not with stolen squash. Not with pride, just wet clothes and a new respect for roots that don't give way. Beside you, your host lets out a breath. Not relief exactly, but something more practiced. This isn't her first waterborne skirmish. She turns to you, expression unreadable in the moonlight, and offers you a small roasted bean cake from a pouch at her side. You accept it without a word, because honestly, you've earned it. And also, it's delicious. You sit together in the moonlight, chewing slowly, listening to the water settle. The lake smoothing itself out like a cat after being ruffled. And you realize these gardens don't just float. They defend themselves. Not with weapons, with silence, with depth, with roots so tangled and long and determined that no thief can steal what's part of the lake. You lie back again. This time, your eyes stay open a little longer. Not out of fear, but out of respect, because here the night holds stories, and some of them fight back. The moon is lower now, resting near the horizon like it's ready to clock out. You sit beside a canal, hands trailing in the cool water, and your brain, which has slowly unwound itself over the course of this quiet night, has latched onto a new question. How did it all stay together? These floating gardens, the canals, the entire watery lattice of civilization. Sure, you've walked on them, slept on them, watched corn grow and axolotls blink at you. But structurally speaking, how? Because the whole thing seems like it should have come undone, snapped at the corners, collapsed in the rainy season, drifted off in strong winds. But it didn't. It held. And the reason? A combination of plants, pressure, patience, and architecture. Made of roots, you dig your fingers into the edge of a chinampa, carefully, curiously. Beneath the topsoil lies more than just dirt. You feel layers, a weave of old reeds packed tight. Then mud, the kind dredged from lake bottoms, nutrient-rich and heavy as wet velvet. Then stakes, hardwood poles driven deep into the lake bed, placed in a rectangle forming the original skeleton of the garden. And at each corner, a tree, usually willow or cypress. Fast-growing, thirsty, eager to dig in and never let go. These trees were the anchors. Their roots reached down into the lake and out through the soil, tangling into neighboring Chinampas, into canal banks, into everything. So even though the Chinampas started as rafts, they became islands, not geologically, but practically, emotionally, culturally. Islands that didn't drift, islands that linked hands underwater. You glance across the canal now and see what looks like one long stretch of farmland. But you know better. It's not one big plot. It's a network, a patchwork quilt stitched together with mud and trust. The Aztecs maintained this system constantly. Families dredged up lake silt to replenish the soil. They reinforced banks. They replaced reed mats. They even bred specific plants to help stabilize the perimeter, like floating gardeners who knew erosion didn't need an invitation to ruin your afternoon. And the canals, they were like veins, moving water, moving people, moving life. You watch. A farmer now, steering a canoe loaded with compost down a narrow canal. His paddle barely makes a sound, but he moves with purpose, sliding between Chinampas like a courier delivering nutrients instead of messages. And it hits you. This entire system was modular, buildable, repairable, expandable. You didn't need a central authority to make it work, though the Aztec Empire definitely loved a good organizational chart. All you needed was reeds, mud, trees, time, and perhaps a few generations who thought of land not as something to conquer, but something to compose. You were lie back again, eyes on the fading stars. Everything here stayed together because it was meant to, not by fate, but by design. A design written in sediment and stem, in currents and canoes, in the spaces between the gardens just as much as in the gardens themselves. You're walking again. The mist has lifted, and now the Chinampas stretch in every direction, green upon green, stitched together with canals like embroidery. It looks endless, like a living, breathing quilt spread across the lake. And for a moment, it's easy to forget. This wasn't just a beautiful idea. It was a machine. A quiet, leafy, mud-packed machine that fed an empire. Because these floating gardens, weren't a novelty. They weren't some fringe project by nature-loving artists. They were infrastructure, core to the beating heart of Tenochtitlán, the capital of the Aztec Empire, a city that held more than 200,000 people at its peak, larger than London at the same time. And what kept all those mouths fed? Not farmland, not imported grain. These gardens, these beds of silt and willow and corn. You pause near a shaded platform where 3 women are grinding maize on flat stones, chatting softly as they press, fold, and flip tortillas. The scent drifts toward you, warm, earthy, inviting. It's the smell of daily life, the background rhythm to every Aztec morning. Corn from Chinampas, chili from Chinampas, tomatoes, beans, amaranth, squash, herbs, all from Chinampas, even flowers used in temples. And not just for ceremony, but for taxes. Entire villages were taxed in marigolds, sunbursts plucked from floating plots. You glance down the canal and spot a canoe stacked with red blossoms, heading toward the heart of the city. Payment in petals. A fine economy. And the scale? It was immense. Hundreds of acres of Chinampas sprawled across Lake Texcoco, feeding the capital not just with food, but with freshness. Harvested at dawn, sold by mid-morning. No cold storage, no preservatives. Just logistics powered by water and sunrise. You take a seat beneath a tree that probably held its first bird before your great-great-grandparents ever considered existing. A breeze moves across the lake, rustling the maize in waves. It's almost hypnotic. You begin to notice something else. This place didn't just feed bodies. It fed systems. The social systems. Families planting together, passing down tools and techniques like heirlooms. The religious systems, with offerings from Chinampas made to gods of rain, corn, fertility. The economic systems, trade routes built on canoes and current. Even politics flowed through here, like water through reeds. Controlled the Chinampas, and you controlled the markets. Control the markets, and you shaped the empire. A boy runs past you, laughing, holding a basket filled with beans. His sister follows, waving a stalk of flowers and yelling something half scolding, half sung. A dog trots behind, unconcerned. Life, sustained by mud. Elegant, silty, miraculous mud. And you think, maybe the Aztecs didn't just build a city on water. They built a model, a way of feeding people that was beautiful, sustainable, cooperative, a future disguised as a past. And maybe we forgot. But here, under the rustle of corn and the sway of reeds, the memory grows back, like everything here, quietly, faithfully, with roots. The sun is setting again. Gold melts into pink. Pink slides into lavender. And the lake? It reflects all of it, like a mirror that remembers how to dream. You stand on a familiar Chinampa, though you can't quite tell if it's the same one you slept on, or just another piece of the great floating tapestry. They blur together after a while, and that's part of the magic. You kneel near the edge, trailing your fingers in the canal, watching ripples fold out into the stillness. And now, you're wondering the last question, the quiet one that's been trailing you since Section 1. Are they still here, these floating gardens, these miracle islands made of mud and roots and memory? And the answer is, sort of. You take a slow walk through the dusk. The Chinampas of Xochimilco, just south of Mexico City, are still alive. Still floating. Kind of. Still planted with marigolds, maize, beans, squash. Some are tended by farmers, just like before. Others are more decorative. Tourists now drift through canals in brightly painted boats called trajineras, sipping drinks, listening to mariachi bands that play songs the Chinampas never asked for. And yet, they're here, still stitched together with reeds, still holding the weight of time. You pause beside an old farmer with a face like carved wood and hands shaped by every season. He doesn't look up, just keeps planting. The same way his ancestors did, the same way his grandchild might. And you realize something very small and very big. Not everything ancient disappears. Some things stay, quietly, in pockets, in practices, in patches of green clinging to canals like whispered memories. You sit again, this time on a stone bench beside a garden that's seen empires rise and fall, seen gods honored and ignored, seen soil turned by wooden hands and machines both. And still, it grows. You look up. The sky is full of the first stars. The lake breathes, and the Chinampa beneath you. It doesn't float like it once did, but it doesn't sink either. It remembers. And maybe that's the point. Not to last forever, not to be untouched, but to be remembered well. You lean back, head resting on your hands, and the sound of frogs, wind, and soft paddles becomes your lullaby. The floating gardens of the Aztecs aren't just a chapter in a book. They're a story the earth keeps trying to tell. And tonight, you heard it. Slow, gentle, layered in mud and maize and moonlight. And as your breathing slows, your thoughts loosen, and your body sinks just slightly into the warm cradle of soil beneath you. You realize this wasn't a bedtime story. It was a map, a floating one, drawn in silence, laced with roots, still here, still waiting.